Good afternoon. My name is John Cheney and I'm here with Martin Doyle from DQ Global. And today's webinar topic is around data quality and how bad data is potentially hurting your business, and hopefully we'll provide some ideas on how you can fix that. So in terms of the broad agenda, we're going to firstly talk about the importance of high quality data to any organization. Then we'll spend a bit of time looking at how we manage data quality in the context of CRM and how we bring the right kind of information together for organizations. And then we'll talk a bit about the typical challenges and reasons behind why you've got bad data in your platforms and systems in the first place. And then towards the end of the webinar, we'll spend a bit of time talking about recommendations and dealing with any questions that come up. So Martin, who is down on the south coast of sunny England today, we're having a heat wave over here in the UK, will take us through the first part of this presentation.
Thank you very much, John, and delighted to be here with you today and also partnering together. Whoops, I just clicked to one too many times with my mouse. Okay, so from a starting point, we actually recognize that there are no data initiatives really. Got to say, most people don't really care about the data. It's kind of the last thing they think of, but hopefully today we'll show how important and critical it is to success of the business. So there are no data initiatives, only business initiatives. And why should any business care? So all businesses want to get good insight, make good choices, and want more revenue, less waste. Now, the best way to make money is to stop wasting it, of course. So less waste is critical. In data terms, that's less scrap, less rework, better decisions. And we want to mitigate risk in the litigious world that we're in, the compliance, GDPR, etc. So those are some of the reasons, or the key reasons, business reasons, that we want to succeed. Now, this gentleman, I hope some of you may know the name. He is a famous quality guru, and he came up with the term, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." So as we're talking about data today, I thought that might be relevant. And I think this next snippet talks about trust. Now, we all want trust in our data so that we can make decisions founded upon high quality data, which leads us up the pyramid, which we'll be talking about a little later on. But trust is very fragile, as you can see. So the statement here is trust is like a paper. Once it's crumpled, it can't be perfect again. Now, there's a challenge around data because when one piece of data is wrong, or are wrong, if you want to be grammatically correct, then you don't trust it. And when you don't trust it, people don't engage with it, and the business's employees don't engage with it, and then it becomes somebody else's problem. So we'll be talking a bit about that later on as well. So I thought a useful starting point might be is around this journey from data to insight. So today we're going to imagine we're a pilot. We are flying along merrily, and we've got some data. So we look down at our instruments and we see 10,000. But from a data perspective, that's not very insightful. We got 10,000. Now, is that 10,000 feet, 10,000 meters? Knowing the units would be useful, but what's the datum point? Are we at sea level or are we at airfield level? Would be really good to know. So in order to turn data into information, it has to have a context. And in this case, the context will be that we're 10,000 feet above sea level. Good news, we've now got some information. However, we have some knowledge. We have mountains at 12,000 feet. Not ideal when you're flying at 10,000 feet, and they are also above sea level. So the wise thing to do, of course, would be to climb to 15,000 feet, fly over the top of the mountains, and clearly the insight is that without climbing, we might have all died. So hopefully you can see the journey from data to insight, and that data as a raw material is frankly useless to us until it has some form of context when we can use it for that higher order stuff to make better decisions in our businesses. But equally, hopefully it makes sense that the raw ingredients need to be of high quality in order to get good insights. If you're into cooking, then the ingredients are all important. And it's so true of many other things. So similarly, in our journey from data to insight, we came up with the concept of the leaning tower of data. So if we have broken foundations and you're trying to build upon those foundations, then you're going up ideally in a vertical path. And you'll have your application data, your CRM data, the reports and dashboards that are there, the AI models, and the insights that you're trying to get with AI and machine learning. The trouble is that if the foundation is wrong, then clearly you're going on the wrong path and you have this leaning tower. And here's what we call the distortion from the truth. So the distortion from the truth is the distance between where we should be and where we are because of the leaning tower of data. And that effectively is all the waste that we've got, the bad decisions that we've made, the scrap and rework that we've got. And often we think that you can be making very bad decisions with a high level of certainty when you rely on things like machine learning. And that's why senior management effectively have to use their gut and their instincts quite often, because the data just doesn't support the decisions, or the data can inform you incorrectly and you start making bad decisions. So hopefully that will make sense so far. So some examples of skewed data and bad insights. So in one database that was analyzed, one man had been pregnant 3 times, pretty impressive. A woman had 97 children. Hundreds of customers had the unique social security number repeated, so they were not unique. Now this is true of our national insurance number in the UK, where actually one day at an event I met a man that was being pursued by the child protection or being asked for money to pay for a child that he actually didn't have, because in the UK as well, believe it or not, national insurance numbers are not unique. They've been recycled incorrectly by the government. Babies and children with mortgages. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but the database told them that was so. 30,000 people born on that date. I would suggest that that's a default value that's been put into the database, or an import or something that's caused that problem to happen. And some customers were even born in the future, and that's probably due to a reversal of US or UK dates, et cetera, et cetera. You can imagine all these things happening again and again. So let's put this into some context and use the marketing funnel as an example of how the raw material going in can have an outcome and an impact on that outcome. There's a lot of talk about KPIs, and there's a lot of talk about performance, outcomes that you're going to get, key result indicators, if you like. So let's mix the two together here. And we've got some input records. We're going to, in this case, we're going to use 100,000 as our input. Both the average quality data and the higher quality data both have 100,000 going in. This one's got 75,000 useful records, because actually 25,000 of them are incorrect. Maybe because the content won't deliver. Maybe because the selection criteria is wrong and these people are not really interested. But in this regard, the higher quality data, we've got 90,000 records. So 75%, 75, 90%, 90,000. Moving down to our inquiries then, we get the same kind of response rate, 2%, but in this case we've got 1,500, this case 1,800. Marketing qualified leads. Now, because this data is not as good, maybe we perhaps got 4%, in this one we got 5%, so 59 versus 88, and you can see the pattern again and again and again. So sales accepted leads, more on this side, but the important thing is that we closed, whoops, not sure if I've lost the mouse, John. Thank you. Closed 1, we've got 4 on this side and 6 on this side. Now that may not seem significant, it's only 2 different, but let's look at the value to the business there. 4 deals won at 50,000, 200,000. 6 deals won at 50,000, 300,000. Again, you might say it's only 100,000, but those could be millions or tens of millions. The important thing is the uplift is 50%. So you can see the impact of a very small improvement here as a massive impact down here. And that's what's happening in your CRM, your marketing automation, your integration with higher quality input data, those ingredients, that raw data going into the system. So let's look at the customer journey here and think about where the data comes from and how it grows across the journey. So we've got one axis here, the vertical axis showing complexity, And on the horizontal axis, we've got the customer journey. And on that path, we've used the classifications, if you like: suspect, prospect, customer, regular, advocate. Now, when you're a suspect and you're in the marketing pot, typically you don't need much data. You need an email in the modern sense of digital marketing. You might want a job title so that you can determine the role and the level and therefore target them appropriately. You certainly want their name if you're going to personalize things, and you want to segment by the right kind of industry. So you don't really need that much data at this point. When they become a prospect, you've qualified them, you've turned them over to the sales team maybe, or you're qualifying them. You want to know where they are, who the decision makers are, and some other criteria. Now, the big jump is when they become a customer. You want to know, are they creditworthy? Where are they? Because you might have to deliver things. Who's the accounts contact? Where are you going to deliver stuff? Where do you deliver the invoice? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, all of this kind of carries on when you're a regular and advocate. But the important thing is that these are now changing, and data changes at 2% per year in business data, which means in 1 year, of course, your data could be as much as a quarter out of date. People die, people move, businesses get taken over, employees change roles, their creditworthiness changes. So you're constantly refreshing this data. So I think at that point, John, I think we're turning it back to you. And I just wonder how this plays into, CRM and your experience in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Martin. So I guess from your presentation, it's clear so far that bad quality data has a real impact on the effectiveness of marketing. And as we move through that funnel to become customers, we've got more data to manage and often coming in from more and different systems. Now, clearly, we operate in the CRM space and we help most of our customers grow their revenues and reduce their operational costs. And I think we recognize that understanding your customer and prospect data is key to making marketing, sales, and the customer experience as effective as it can be. And when we talk about revenue growth, well, there's only really two ways of growing your revenues. You either find new customers, find new prospects, and bring them on board as a potential client, or you cross-sell what you currently provide to your existing customer base. When we look at that data from a prospecting perspective, what we really want to understand is within the data that we hold, whether it's already in our CRM database or whether we've bought it in from third-party providers, do those organizations match our target customer profile? Are they the right kind of individuals, and are they in the buying cycle? And when we look at customer data, then we want to understand, well, could they potentially be buying more for us? Have we got organizations where we could be upselling? Are they happy or unhappy? Are they advocates, as you say? So the data to this is key, because if we get the data quality right, then we can absolutely begin to grow and maximize the revenues. One of the approaches that we take with a lot of customers is to define what we call the ICP, the ideal customer profile. So this is about using the data to identify what is the profile of organizations that you typically want to target, and who are the people inside those organizations you want to target. And maybe the easiest way for me to illustrate that is to use the example that we have here at Workbooks. So we sell CRM solutions into the mid-sized enterprises, and what we do is we use a combination of organizational profile data and persona data to identify those organizations we want to target. So from an organization perspective, we're interested in location. We don't do a lot of business in China, for example, but we do a lot more business in Europe and North America. We're interested in industries because we don't particularly sell into some industries. So we have no customers in quarrying, for example, but we have a lot of customers in media and publishing and manufacturing sectors. So we're using the industry data point and making sure we've got as much data in our platform around SIT codes and LinkedIn industry information to help us classify the right kind of organizations. And we use employee numbers. Again, we sell into organizations that are in the retail sector, but if they've only got 100 people, it's more likely that most of those people are working on the shop floor. So whereas in a media and publishing firm, 100 or 200 people would be a good size organization for us to work with. Alongside that, as you might imagine, we use the persona data, so typically targeting CEOs and sales, marketing, and customer services leaders. But when we help build ICPs for customers, then there is a tendency to try and be a bit too granular. And if you do that, it gets much more complicated. So we would always advocate that you keep the ICP definition at a data level that you can easily get. If you want to identify organizations that have red trousers, it's quite hard to do, right? Because you need to go and speak to them to understand whether they wear red trousers or not. Whereas you can buy data in on things like locations, industry, employees, to help you get the right kind of segmentation of your data. But then clearly the challenge there is maintaining it, because as we talked about, data coming from different systems won't always have the same kinds of structure. So having built your ICP, then what do you want to keep? What data do you need in your CRM platform to make it usable for you? And how do you build a 360-degree view of that data? Well, we'd obviously start with what I describe as the basics. You clearly need details on the organizations and people that you deal with. Where CRM begins to come into its own is where you're really tracking the engagement. So the meetings, the activities, and email communications, because you'll have that data in your business. If that data's stuck away in Outlook, for example, in Exchange, then as your salespeople come and go, or your customer services people come and go, they just don't have the context. And as you said before, data on its own isn't enough. You need to understand the context of what's going on. So it is important that if you're going to use your data wisely, you do have the information that you need where you need it. We'd obviously recommend that you start building your ICP information inside CRM. So you've got the profiling data that you need, whether that's industry or interests or whatever else it might be. But it really should be much more than that. You should be looking at the digital engagement. I guess one of the most obvious changes we've seen in the last 12 months has been the complete shift to digital marketing. With most people working at home. We haven't been to a trade show in the last 18 months, and we don't expect to go to one until probably the end of the year at the earliest. So it's been a massive switch in terms of investment and effort into digital marketing for us and for many of our clients. And therefore, we want to leverage that digital footprint much more effectively inside CRM. Certainly many of our clients do. So bringing in page view data, form fill data, email open and click through data, that's now increasingly important. And frankly, it is often more important than some of the profiling data that we're seeing. That's giving us intent. So if people are on your websites looking at the products and services that you provide, that gives you some idea they're potentially in the buying cycle. And that's when data becomes more than just data, it becomes some form of insight. You obviously want in-person engagement on the hopeful event we do go back to trade shows in the future at some point. But you also want the transactional data, because you want to know whether this is a customer that's bought £50,000 from you or £500,000 from you in the past. Do they have an opportunity to upsell? What things have they bought from you? So increasingly you can see that as we build our data set, we've got more and more valuable data in our business, including things like customer sentiment, survey information, which we can provide electronically now using digital surveys, any customer issues they might have had. We've got many of our customers bringing in third-party review information into CRM so they can see whether their customers are providing data on things like Trustpilot. And that 360-degree view of your world begins to give you more data and hopefully more insight into how you might use it moving forward. But the reality is you've got to bring that data together. Obviously, the place to store that data is your customer relationship management platform. That's where you want it. But the reality is you've got data inputs coming from lots of places. You've got real-time data coming in from your website because people are filling in forms. And on a Monday, they might use one email address and one company name. And on Tuesday, they might use a slightly different variation of the company name. We've got data coming from your accounting or ERP platforms where, again, the names of the people and names of the organizations are likely to be different from the names that you put into your CRM platform. We've got data coming in from email marketing platforms if they're not connected, survey tools. You're almost certainly importing data into your business, whether you're buying data for third-party providers or bringing in manually from other systems in your business. And you've also got humans adding data to these systems. And humans, as we all know, don't always get things right. So whilst there's tremendous value in bringing the data together, let's be honest, it creates some complexities and some challenges, because we know that data is going to get duplicated. We know things are going to have different naming conventions. We know the data quality in some systems won't be as high as others. We know the data structures aren't all the same. And that's really where the challenges start to happen. We know that if we can bring this data together, it can bring real insight for us, but it's hard to do. So I guess, Martin, this is what you guys do for a living. You help organizations improve their data quality, and we're very pleased you're now partnering with us, and your technology is part of our platform. But perhaps you could go through some of the challenges and then provide some advice on how we deal with some of this stuff.
Thanks, John. That's great. That's a great interlude, I think, into the next slide, which we call our ball of grief, which will appear in a second. All right, here we go. Yeah, so this is what we call our data management ball of grief. So as you can see, there's all kinds of aspects here. And as John mentioned, when you're trying to manage one system, that's hard enough. When you're trying to integrate many systems where you have many sources to a single target or many sources to many targets is very, very difficult. And you can see some of the things in here. Ultimately, in the middle, we want that single customer view, that 360-degree view that John is talking about, which is elusive for us and allows us, if you do get it, to master your data, create a golden record, and hopefully synchronize that across the enterprise as necessary. And we've seen that being done with enterprise service buses, with continuous integration. But it's all about all these challenges that you're seeing here: validity, completeness, uniqueness, nulls, invalid values, etc. So these become then real business challenges. So, what are the problems that we're looking to face? Why do they occur and why do they matter? And what's the significance to the business? Where do they occur? When and how often do they occur? And ultimately, who's going to do something about it? Because we often see this scenario where there's a kind of phenomena that we think of as social slacking. In fact, there was a study done many years ago. Unfortunately, the name of the person eludes me right now, but they did an interesting study about teams and how teams work together. And it was to do with measuring the pull on a dynamometer, like a spring balance, and you pull on it, one person, let's just say they pulled 100 kilograms. When you put two people on that balance, you expect them to pull 200, but they don't. They might pull 190. When you put three on, they produce less. Now, what happens is you get this phenomena of social slacking because they think someone else is going to take up the slack. And that kind of happens, I think, in the data quality world, where people think that it's someone else's problem, where really it's everybody's problem. So I thought it'd be useful to kind of give you some insights into why poor data quality occurs. And we've got this innocent little face on here that says, it must be somebody else because it's clearly not me. And give you some of the reasons why we see there being problems. First of which is human error. Now, ultimately, it all comes down to human error, really, because it doesn't matter whether you're migrating data, integrating data, humans putting it in, etc. You get some errors. And here are just some simple examples. So if you're going to do in old terms, a mail merge, which we now do, of course, in an email merge, when you see data like actually I've seen today, record no longer there, deceased, company's gone out of business, they were actually in the name field. So when you go and merge that stuff, you end up with terrible messages like this: dear do not mail, dear deceased, etc. Another example might be invalid, ways of filling in a field because it's a default value or it's a required field. So often you see a full stop or a period or spaces or a dash or anything that gets a human from that input field to another field. And there are downstream impacts, that snowball effect down the line, causing cost. Now, there is a phenomenon called 110, 100. So if it costs 1 unit of cost at point of data entry, say it's £1 to fix or to put the data in correctly, it'll cost you £10 to rectify that shortly after it's been created. However, if it goes down the line and causes a problem with a client, that could be £100. So it's really important to get it right first time, as in all data management, data quality type initiatives. We've all seen it: bad imports, data's imported, ends up in the wrong place, in the wrong format. And here's some simple formatting examples where we've got casing issues with O'Neill and McDonald's and IBM, etc., etc. So that was human error. Another one can be misinterpretation and lacking in standards. So when we've seen integrations, we've seen before M could stand for mail in one system and married in another. So when it comes to blending these records together or selecting a record as a single view, which one do we take, male or married? That might mean two very different things depending on your context, and single and separated again might be very important. In a hotel project, we found 9 variants of gender in there. It could be male, M, Mr. with a full stop, Mr. without a full stop, and on and on and on. I think you get the gist that there is inconsistency here in the types of data that could be captured. And we'll talk about how to overcome these a little later on. So reason number 3 can be Boolean, so the yes, no type flag. Now, you could have a -1 mean yes or no. You can have a 0 and a 1 mean yes or no. But I've even seen things like OK to male equals yes, not OK to male equals yes, and the variance you can see on the screen. That causes problems across systems. Date errors. You see things where people have literally put 99999 in the system so that you can overcome a validity check that might be imposed by a developer or the application. Date precision, where you've got 2 years, 01 versus 2001, etc., and European to US date formats, which can cause all sorts of problems if you're time dependent and you're really trying to compute things correctly around events. Telephone numbers, of course, classically, when you import data via an Excel sheet, it cleverly thinks that a number with a 0 on the front doesn't need a 0, so it strips those off. We see O's and zeros, I's and ones, formatted as loads of zeros because you have to have 9 characters, let's say, and the international dialing format variants that you might see, which gives a problem if you're trying to do things with telephone preferences, do not call list, corporate TPS, etc., because they don't align with the reference data that you're trying to suppress with. And the same is true of email. So some obvious examples, I've just put local part at domain, local part being the first name dot last name normally before the domain. And we've seen .com because the N is near the M. We see .co, UK because they've missed the dot and maybe put a comma in the place. If you've hit shift at or don't hit the shift, you'll end up with a quote marks and you end up with an invalid value. And lo and behold, it doesn't deliver. When it doesn't deliver, your sender reputation goes down, which means that people don't open your emails, you have less marketing success, etc., etc. So I'm sure you've all seen these. These are, of course, correctable auto-magically in many cases where we can fix that data. Thought it might be useful to get some language around some of these fixes. We hear lots of terminology, validate, verify, cleanse. We have some very strict language around this. For us, validate means syntactically correct. So does it look like an email? Does it look like a telephone number? Even though it might not deliver or ring, it means it's valid in that context, has a rule that you can test against. To verify is to check against a proxy of the real world thing. The most common one is probably an address file, a postal address file, a deceased register, an enrichment file. This is where you're checking against a list that compares you to something. That's the best check you can do without physically going there, which leads us to what we call authentication, where we can take an email or a telephone number and we can test to see whether that email will deliver to the inbox or the phone number will actually ring. And those can be done silently, so the email is never sent, the phone number never rings, and that can be dealt with internationally. So validate, verify, and authenticate are very different things to us, although they're mixed in common language, as is data and information. They're transposed and interwoven, in my opinion, of course, incorrectly. So another reason, variation and dislocation. So we've got here on the left-hand side, we've got person A and person B representing my name. And you can see that in the first name field, in the second line, it's got my middle initial. The name is spelled differently. And there's variations in number formats, and they're transposed because one might be phone number 1, might be phone number 2. All of this makes it very difficult for matching and very difficult to know which is actually correct. And of course, on the right-hand side, you can see address A and address B, and hopefully you can see the variance there, the dislocation there, and that you've got PO and PI and et cetera, and GB versus UK, which all requires standardization and verification, typically against a trusted reference source, like in the UK, the Royal Mail file, or in the US, the USPS, the Postal Services. So some other things that cause challenges for matching: aliases of names, synonyms, etc. So you've got Rob, Bob, Bobby, Robert, Robbie, all those things you can see. We use those to bring those down to a common form so they can help us with matching. Phonetically, you can see Thompson or Xerox might be actually the same. So phonetic algorithms get used, and all sorts of standardization is used to help in the matching process. And then finally, I won't read the quote because I know you can all read, but the point here is that you have false assumptions. And when we assume things, we all know that that makes an ass out of you and me. I'm sure we've all seen that approach. But we can assume that all data is in the right place. Well, we know that it clearly isn't. Email matches are the same. So if you think that email matches on exact matching are the same, we're in a world of pain, because we've got generic email, sales at, marketing at, info at, which could be at groups, but they have different people attached. Literally, I've seen today where we did exact matching on a customer's file using the technology that John has embedded in his solutions. And we found people with the same email at physically different locations because they work in Europe, they work in the US, they work in the UK. Null and empty fields, they're always a nightmare. A match for something against nothing, or one value to another value, they definitely have an impact. Often people pick the newest record or the oldest record that are based upon the create date or modified date as being the best record, but that really isn't true. There are lots of other criteria you might want to select to determine which is your best record. And when free-form values are used in fields, always a nightmare. We'll talk about that in a moment. And default pick lists are an interesting one. We had a story about in the US where there was an insurance company who had a default value on their system of fractured right femur. And as a result, the actuaries would no longer insure fractured right femur. But when somebody with some common sense looked into it, they realized that the default value on the screen was fractured right femur. And of course, nobody was picking that pick list, and therefore they made those awful insight decisions, and they reversed that and took that default pick list off. And data transformations, the Bob, Robert kind of thing is all important. We need to get those down to a common form. And the sounds like with the Xerox example that we saw earlier is important that we use those. So conscious of time, so what can we do to improve this low quality data? Well, I think suggest these 6 approaches. Now, identify is to recognize that there is a problem. This is a bit like being an alcoholic and saying, I am Martin Doyle, I'm an alcoholic. I've often said I'm Martin Doyle, I'm a dataholic. So we've got to recognize that there is a problem here. And therefore, if we recognize it and accept it, we then can move on, and we can qualify, therefore, the size of the problem. Gather evidence. Now, gathering evidence is typically around analyzing the data and doing a data audit, or what we call a data profile, where you basically research the tables, the fields, the values, and understand how big the problem is, and give you an insight into how you're going to solve that problem. So you quantify the issue, how big is the problem, and where is the damage being done. Typically, it's a good old Pareto scenario where 20% of the things are having an 80% impact. So you want to work out how we're going to attack those. Acceptance, this is the tipping point. I accept that there's a problem, acknowledge the scale of the task, and then that allows you to define what the goals and objectives are going to be. What does good data quality look like? What does acceptable data quality look like? Because only then can you measure against that datum. It's no good saying it's bad, it's rubbish. We need to know what is good in order to measure against that datum point. And then finally, oops, just click again. Oops, sorry. Carry out the agreed task in the order of significance. So work out what the criticality is and then attack these in the right order, because you might want to say, what's important for me to focus upon our customers first, because they're the people we're doing business with, and we need to sort the customer data out before anything else. Or you could take a lower risk strategy in terms of if you're new to this, and look at data that might be less critical and test out your rules and techniques and procedures on that data. It's really a business decision. So in terms of deduplication reduction, we might want to look at some user training. Ensure that the users understand the impacts. Make sure that they are trained in searching for records before they add a record to the system. Make sure that they have guidelines as to the standards by which they should be adding data based upon the discovery that we made earlier. Define pick lists. This is where, the broken right FEMA scenario. Use pick lists in your system, but try and avoid default values, because people will just be lazy and just the first value will be the consistent value. Free-form values, avoid them if you can. I know they're necessary, but avoid them if you can. We helped a client out who had free-form values in their fields because they had emails, telephone numbers, personally identifiable information, and we had to run some advanced AI to identify and classify those records to determine what was there to move them. It was tricky though, because on this occasion, this was it was a hospitality client, and we actually saw in there won the Olympics 100-meter hurdles or 110-meter hurdles, bronze medal, etc. So using Google, of course, you could find that, but I think that's quite an unusual case. Use duplicate detection rules for sure to prevent duplicates getting in, but try and get your users involved to understand around the duplicate detection phase. Clean from the top down. By that, I mean, if you were cleaning your house, you don't start on the ground floor, clean that up, and then go to the top floor and then clean that, and all the dirt goes down to the lower levels. So start at organization, account, company, whatever you describe that thing at high level, start at the top, deduplicate that. As a result, everything that's below that will cascade down and reassign itself to the surviving record, and then drop down to the next floor down, so to speak, contacts, person, people, whatever the choice you have for that entity, and potentially use duplicate detection technology. And I think that's over to you, John.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Martin, I have to say some interesting insights in, firstly, the complexities of data management when you're bringing different systems together, and then ultimately the advice to deal with it. In our customer base, for example, we see quite a bit of questions around, well, should I let my sales guys manage and merge records and stuff like that? So I think it is for different organizations to figure out what's the right approach for them. But ultimately, once we get better data inside our platforms, then it will give us more competitive advantage, allow organizations to make more informed decisions, insightful decisions, and ultimately that should drive more top-line revenue, less waste, and therefore more profit. I think the key to that, which is what we talked about today, is that CRM combined with good quality tools to manage your data more effectively gives you better data. That in turn delivers better insight and ultimately better business. I think the challenge, if you like, excuse me, is recognizing that there really is a problem. And if you want to find a way to do something, you absolutely can. If you don't, you'll just find an excuse. And that's a quote from Jim Rowan. But I think that's really the key to this, is that for many organizations, data and data quality is kind of this, oh, it looks hard, it looks difficult, how am I going to deal with it? But actually with the right approach and the right tools, you can really improve the data that you have inside your business, and actually that will give you a much better outcome from the investments that you're making in marketing, sales, and customer service. So thanks for your time, Martin. We're pretty much bang on schedule. So I'm just going to open up the session to questions. If anybody does have any questions, then please type those in the question box in the GoToWebinar session. We will be recording this, so you'll all get a copy of the recording. We'll include in the email we send out a link to a demonstration we actually did of the DQ platform connected to workbooks, which shows you how we're able to take the data in CRM and deduplicate it based on some pretty sophisticated rules and technology that really addresses the issues that Martin talked through. So the first question we have in, and I'll give this one to you, Martin, should marketing take the lead on such an initiative?
Good question. I think it depends on the business, John. We found that this surfaces, depending on the organization, either via IT or via marketing, somebody ends up with this ball. And if it's market-led as a business and it's a marketing initiative, then yes, marketing for sure. If it's an integration migration problem across the enterprise, then I think it then falls into the IT camp. But this is a big problem. You know, who owns this?
Good answer. So second question, I think it's around justifying the investment in data quality, because I guess in relative terms, the technology that we provide is not that expensive, but the efforts often for the internal business can be high. Well, how do you go about justifying the investment in this area?
Again, I think you have to try and put hard cash to the problem. So what is the impact of the problem here? We had a customer, and it depends how much pain you're in. Literally last week, we had a client or a prospect come on. They had 2 million records in their CRM. They needed to get this done by the end of the month. They see that as a critical initiative for their email marketing. So they took on that task, and what we were trying to do is automate the process and humanize the exception. We worked out that if they had to review those records and the duplicates that we've identified already, they were up and going within 7 minutes to get their system live. We identified a bunch of duplicates, which Connor from our business is working on with this prospect, and they would be able to automatically merge, I think, 30 to 60,000 records without human review, which is literally saving weeks of time. So it's how much would it cost for somebody to sit there? What's the business opportunity lost by people sitting there? I think we just got to put it in monetary terms, John.
Sounds good. So a question from one of the audience. Thanks for the presentation. Data quality is clearly a very important component for data management teams. Which industry do you think is in most need of data quality tools? That's an interesting question. Any views on that?
Well, my view on it would be
all of them.
Probably a little flippant. Data is horizontal. What we find is that in an industry, you've got a customer, you've got a student, you've got a patient, you've got 100 ways of describing people, but at the end of the day, they're companies, premises, or people that you're working with, and they're duplicates. So it's all industries really. Some are more sophisticated than others. B2B tends to have less data, but more attributes. B2C tends to have lots of data and less attributes. So B2C kind of has a bigger problem in terms of duplication, but B2B tends to be a more complex problem because you've got relationships with other systems, obviously.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Commonly.
I think that's, from our experience, that's one of the challenges, is that once you start in standalone systems is less of a problem, but we all recognize today that having joined up data allows us to get the 360-degree view we're looking for from customers, but that creates the complexity. So it's then recognizing that once you start bringing data in from your accounting system and your website and everything else, data's harder, much harder to manage, and that drives the data quality agenda.
Well, that's the challenge there, John, is which one do you keep as your master, isn't it? So you don't lose that relationship with your external system, because you've got to keep the one that might be the master. Then you end up with a problem. Oh, we just found some duplicates in our CRM. Oh dear, we got duplicates in our ERP. And then it becomes an interesting discussion about which is the driving master system, but that's beyond today's scope.
Yeah, well, we've seen that in a project we did with your tool, where we had 5 different organizations coming in from the accounting system, and they need to be 5 separate different organizations because each one's in a different normal account ledger. But then what we did is then create a effectively headquarter record, which only exists in CRM, that joins them all together. That means that you can report across all 5 in one place. So yeah, Interesting times as we bring more data together and try and maximise the value of our data. So
Indeed.
that's our last question. Martin, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
It's been very informative. And to the audience, thank you for listening. And as I said earlier, we will send you out a copy of the webinar, and hopefully you all found that useful. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.
Thanks.